One of the most common things you'll do with a tabular model, or any analysis services model really, is to import data to it from a relational database. We've seen this before in a couple of prior lessons where we just pulled some data into a model, and we're typically using relational because it's relatively straightforward. We're starting with our tabular project 1, which has already been created. If you're not sure how to get this far, then look at the previous lesson, which goes through that in quite a lot of detail. So I'm going to click on Import from Data Source, and you can see there are relational data sources in this section. We'll use SQL Server for our initial data load. So if I click on SQL Server and Next, it'll ask me for a server name. I'll put in my Lab SQL 1, the server I've been using, and my authentication will get me to that server. And what I'm going to do is point out the Contoso Retail DW. We'll continue using that. How is the tabular model to access data? I'm going to put in my credentials here. And then I can select from a list of tables or write a query. I'm going to use the select list of tables because that's obviously easier and quicker. And what I'm going to do is choose this sales table that we've been working with and click that. Now I want to bring the tables that are related to that. There are tables that aren't, that I may want in the future, but I'm just going to start by bringing in the related ones. So I'll click on Select Related Tables, which will automatically select any table that has a foreign key relationship. Now we're going to pause here for a minute. We could just click Finish, and if we did that, then as in the past lessons, the table import wizard would start reading in data. Here's the rub. This fact sales table could be enormous, and this one it's kind of big. It's 3.5 million rows, something like that. I don't want to import that much data for my testing purposes, so I actually can filter that down, and I would recommend you do this whenever you have very large data sets. So this shows me a sample of the data. Now one thing I can do to filter this is unclick the columns that I just don't need, and there certainly are some. So if you can uncheck columns, you will speed your processing, reduce your storage, reduce your memory usage, and so on. So please do that. The other thing I can do is, now that unchecking the columns essentially makes the rows narrower, I can also reduce the number of rows in the set by filtering it. So I'm going to filter this data and just bring in the rows that are between, say, 1/1/2007 and the end of that same year. So I find this a little bit easier to type. 12 and let's go 31/2007, or maybe even better, why not the end of July of 2007. So I'll just bring in 6 months of data. That will reduce the amount of data I'm bringing in. I can still model the data just fine, but my queries will only include about 6 months. But that's fine for my purposes for now. So I'll click that. It saved that filter. If I changed my mind, I could click a Clear Row Filters button. But when I click OK, I can see it's applied filters, and I'll go ahead and finish. Now I know that if I imported the entire sales table, it would be about 3.5 million rows. So let's see what I get by importing only 6 months. And so I can see that I got only 864,000 rows. So that transferred fairly quickly, and I'm only doing this for the design environment purposes. So we will look at how to clear that once we deploy this to production. But let me click the Close button here. And now I can see that I have my tables, so they're all here. I want to look at my relationships to see that in fact have they been brought in, and I can see that I do in fact have all 6 tables. My relationships are set up. Now these are set up automatically because the relational database had the foreign keys established. So when the tabular model brought the data in, it looked and saw the foreign keys and set these up for me. If there were any missing, I could go ahead and just create them. And we've looked at that in the past. If some maybe weren't correct, I could change them, but these all look fine. So I'll just close that. Now if I want to look at this model to see what I actually have, I can click the Analyze in Excel button here. And what that will do is launch this environment into Excel so I can look at it. But this is the pivot table list that's using MDX. And really this pivot table thinks it's a multidimensional cube, so I don't quite get the same experience, which is good or bad. But what I am going to do is add a measure. It says no measures defined. So let's just add one, because we already know how to do that. If we go to our sales table and find sales amount, down here we can just do an auto sum. And get sum of sales amount. No, I don't really like that measure name. It's too long, so let's just call that, for the heck of it, revenue again. And now I have defined a measure. Now if I save that, that will get written back to the model, and let me browse with Excel again. And now I do have a revenue measure. Now I brought in only 6 months, so let's just take a look and see if that's truly what we have. So I'll find my dim date and find the calendar year. So there's 2007. And that's January through the end of July, so that's fine. So I've got what I expect. And the last thing I want to do is deploy this, and I have set this up to not process when I deploy, so I'll just click the deploy button, get this on the server, and that's fine. And then the last thing I want to show you, so this database should now have showed up, is in the Tabular Project 1, I did limit the sales table to just those dates. So I want to undo that. Now that I have this deployed to the server, I no longer want 6 months of data or 7 months. I want all of it. And the way I can do that is to edit this partition. So this is the default single partition. You notice what the designer did is it added a where clause. So I'm just going to take that where clause off so that I get all of my fact rows into this partition now. Now to check that I'm now getting the full fact table, I'm going to select process table, and actually I'll select all of these tables so I can see them all go. And I'll just do a process full. And now I can see each of the tables transferring data. And what I'm really interested in is whether I get all of the 3.5 million fact rows or just the 800,000 that I had before. Now my process is complete, and I can see I've now brought in all of the rows that I wanted to process. I can double check that again using Excel. And if I want to look at my revenue by calendar year and month, I can see now I have much more than just 6 months.